It's a holly jolly Christmas. It's the best time of the week. When you get to tune into Damian and Devlin's review of Black Christmas.
Yes, welcome to the Damian and Devlin show, and this is our review of Black Christmas, the 1974 Canadian horror cult classic directed by Bob Clark and starring Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, Art Hindle, Margot Kidder, and John Saxon. Now, this is an interesting movie. I've seen it several times, but Damian was the one who actually picked it, and when he said he wanted to see Black Christmas, my first response is, you're going to hate this. But what was weird about it is when we were getting ready to watch it, I asked him why you picked this, and he told me some things, and I said, Damian, I don't think this is the movie you're thinking it is. So anyhow, we watched it anyhow, and I'm interested to see what he has to say, because it was totally not expecting it. The thing he could expect from it is I told him that this movie's main claim to fame was that John Carpenter has said that this was his inspiration for Halloween, and he borrowed heavily from it. And I'm glad that John Carpenter admitted to it, because it is obvious there are lots of things he did, but John Carpenter took it to the next level, which is, I don't think there's anything wrong when you're admit that you're paying tribute or blatantly stealing, but he obviously was affected by it, and he took Halloween to the next level. Now, this is the first time I've actually seen Black Christmas this close to seeing the original, because we just reviewed Halloween, and it kind of was neat because I got to see more of it, as I thought, more of the things that John Carpenter probably saw in this movie. And so it was kind of nice. So thank you for picking this movie. I actually really like this movie. But I know it's rough around the edges. And what's your first take on seeing Black Christmas?
No, I didn't hate it. So you thought I would hate it. I actually didn't hate it. It definitely is rough around the edges. I do have significant problems with the movie, which I'll get into. But overall, it was okay. I would say that I found the movie more boring than anything else. Which surprised me as well, because the way that you were hyping it up and whatnot, and you're saying you're going to hate this. I thought I was going to hate it for a lot of different reasons, but definitely not the ones that I'm about to go into. But it was okay.
All right, first time I watched this is actually one of my first horror movies, and I used to watch horror movies with my sister-in-law, Cheryl, and I was a teen, and I was a bit of a wuss. I love horror now, and I can watch, I think I watch some horrors that he doesn't even like, but at the time, every time something scary would come, I'd be literally like this, and she'd be going, okay, he's walking up the stairs now. and that was how I watched horror movies. So movies like this, or the other Canadian classic Prom Night, I watched like this the first time. So when I actually saw it the first time, it could creep me out quite a bit. Only because I have that original, I think it was actually more scary to have somebody descriptively describing what was going on, because I realized I had more of a twisted imagination than Bob Clark did. Now, I have to clear up something first before we go into our positives. Yes, this is the same Bob Clark that gave us the Christmas classic, A Christmas Story. He did that about 10 or 12 years later, but I love that he gave us two Christmas classics, and you can see our review of that in our channel as well. So I'm glad we're tackling both of them, because they're both the extreme, but they're both kind of classics in their own right. Do you want me to start with positives?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Right. Let's hear what you have to say, because you probably have a lot more positives than I will.
I do, and I admit this movie is rough around the edges. It doesn't play out like a Hollywood movie, and because Hollywood glamorizes everything, and even John Carpenter knew that. But what I love is Bob Clark has some amazing moments here. In fact, he uses light and shadow, and he uses the whole seeing it from the killer's perspective, and that is something that he really brought to the table. Now, I'm not saying he might have been the first movie to use it, but he's the one who used it in a big way. And I think he uses the light and shadow really good. In fact, there are some moments that I actually think he actually does it a little more subtly than John Carpenter does, to the point that every shadow I saw in this movie, I just assumed the killer was there. And I think I still am unsettled by this movie, even though I know how it resolves and plays. But, you know, I get scared easier than Damian, so I found myself terrified. And just old school things like this, basically, for anybody who doesn't know the movie, it's basically a sorority house just getting ready for Christmas holidays. And a stalker basically starts with crude phone calls, and the phone calls get worse and worse, and killings start to happen. I don't want to go more into it because this is a movie, the less you know about it, the better it is. But I think this was also Bob Clark's first. I don't think there was a lot of the old teen sorority killers at the time, too. So that became a big thing in the 80s, and the fact that this was done in 74, he should be commended. Yeah, there's some horrible cuts and edits we'll get into in the negatives, but what I love is that there is some awesome stuff in this. There's some shots of body parts in crevices that are so well done. I don't want to give too much away. One of my favorite sequences, he actually has a choir of kids singing, I believe, "O Come All Ye Faithful," and there's a murder happening at the time, and it's so artistically done. It's almost too beautiful to be a murder. Like, it's just amazing to see. And just some of the clever killings. Not a huge body count in this, but the actual times they do show the killings, which aren't many, are well done. I love the 1970s feel because this is a Canadian film. It was filmed in Canada. I'm not going to state where because I'm going to be wrong. But it came around a time that it was inspired by killings that were happening. So they didn't. This is not based on a true story, but there was stuff like this going on, and I think that makes it great. And I love seeing the neighborhood, the clothes. I know Damian will hate all the 1970s stuff, but I thought it was cool, and I thought the characters were real. Like, almost too real. Almost to the point where you didn't want to see them.
I will agree with you on that. Yeah. And believe it or not, this is one of those movies, and you pointed this out with a couple other reviews that we've done, it doesn't feel over the top. It feels normal and natural. So I actually don't have any negatives with regards to the wardrobe or anything. And I actually did like the cast's performance in this. I felt like everybody played their role really well. There was obnoxious characters, but again, you find those people in real life. And it just felt real, so I will agree with you on that. The performances by the actors were really well done.
Yeah, and they actually have some surprising performances in this movie.
Lois Lane.
Lois Lane, Margot Kidder, one of her first roles is in this, and she plays like a real foul-mouthed, sorority broad that likes to get drunk and isn't afraid to be dirty. Olivia Hussey was just coming off of Romeo and Juliet, and the fact that they got her was a big deal. I read something that they didn't think they'd get her. She actually didn't go on to much after this, but she was expected to be the real deal, like she was going to be the next big star, but she almost comes off a little too classy in this movie.
Is that the British one?
Yeah, that one, yeah. Because it's almost at times I felt like she was trying to suppress that she was British.
Yeah.
And so her accent kind of seemed weird to me. I couldn't tell, it's not really British, but it's there. But Andrea Martin went on to become a comedian in SCTV and becoming a Canadian legend in comedy. And she plays this really, nerdy girl with the curly hair, which I swear, girls I went to school with. So very realistic. And it's funny that she probably went on to become the biggest thing here. One thing I have to commend the script is Hollywood went on to take horrors into a new vein. Hockey masks, burlap sacks, the mask in Halloween, the William Shatner mask. The thing I love about Black Christmas is you don't really ever get a shot of any of that kind of stuff. They really hail it home that this could be anybody in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I think that adds some terror to it because they don't Hollywood it by saying it's Freddy and he's in your nightmares. No, this guy is a real guy, and we don't know if it's any of the men we're seeing on the screen, and that kind of puts, for me, added terror to the script.
Yeah.
Because, as I've said, this was kind of like they saw articles about this happening to sorority girls. Even when they almost aired this on TV in 1978, there was a couple of sorority girls that got killed, and they actually pulled the premiere of this movie. And because of the way they handle this, I can understand why they did it. Because this movie does not have anything Hollywood in it. It's... the killer is not Hollywood. The storylines are not Hollywood. Hollywood has found a way to... this was a rough gem, and they found a way to make it polished. But I think the thing that I love about this movie is that it is so unpolished. The performances are pretty good. They're not anything memorable. They're almost sometimes kind of laughable. Margot Kidder is very realistic, but she's almost like hilarious too. And I don't know if that's what it was meant to be.
I mean, that's her character, right? Like, I stand by what I said. I think the cast did a pretty good job. Every single one of them. I don't think there was a single character that I felt didn't fit in. There was no, in my opinion, no wooden acting, no over-the-top obnoxiousness, no, I know she's definitely going to die. I literally didn't know who was going to die and who was going to survive in this. So that was actually quite refreshing.
You can continue with your product.
Yeah. So going off of like the whole killer thing and being anybody in your neighborhood, I really like the fact that you don't know who this guy is, and you never really see like his face or anything like that. So there's something that happens at the end, and you were talking to me, and okay, that definitely could be the killer. We honestly don't know, and I liked that aspect, and I will agree with you 100%. The use of shadows in this were excellent, because there was one scene in particular where British girl, what's her name?
Olivia Hussey.
And then Afro girl.
Andrea Martin.
Yeah, they were sitting, and one of them was listening on the phone, and then behind in the background you could see like the shadow, like as if the killer was just kind of doing this, watching them from somewhere, but you could see the shadow moving on the wall, and I thought, that's really well done. You said that there was a shot of where somebody is getting murdered in their bed, and before that happens, somebody comes to check on them, and behind them, apparently, there's a shadow.
Yeah, and I keep finding new shadows in this, which kind of creep me out even more in this movie. But again, the shadow is important in this movie because of the fact that if you're not showing a masked killer, then you need to find creative ways to show the killer without showing his face.
Yeah, and I thought that was really well done. Some of my favorite parts from this movie were from the killer's perspective. Just watching people, some of the creepy stuff, like rocking somebody back and forth on a chair.
The voices.
The voices, it's creepy and unsettling, and I really, really enjoyed the fact that it was well done in that aspect. I mean, you could go over the top bug nuts crazy, similar to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it's so ridiculous that it's almost stunningly powerful. But this is done in such a small, subtle way. You know you're dealing with somebody that's mentally deranged, and that's what makes it so unpredictable. So I really liked that aspect. And, some parts of the soundtrack as well I felt were pretty effective. Like, you made a comment.
Simplistic, yeah.
Yeah, very simplistic. Like, there was a part at one time where it sounds like somebody just drags their fingers across the piano, and you're like, was that part of the soundtrack, or is that like somebody doing it?
I kept thinking the cat was running across the piano, but I could never find a piano.
Yeah, so I felt the use of music in this was really, really well done. It was a little repetitive at times, especially when you go to the first-person view of the killer. The same kind of music plays every time, but I still felt it was okay.
The breathing too.
I did like.
I think John Carpenter got that too.
For sure. Like within the first 5 minutes of the movie, you're seeing through the killer's perspective as he busts into the house, and you can hear him like breathing obnoxiously. And I said that definitely is where John Carpenter got the whole for Michael Myers. So I thought that was really, really nicely done too. Again, adds to the mentally deranged, unhinged, we don't know what this guy is capable of or what even he's going to do. So I felt that was really well done. Be honest, let's go in with my negatives. I have to talk about just the way that the movie was filmed. There are some horrible cuts in this, and one that stood out to me in particular was near the end. You're watching the camera pan from, like, in a hallway from room to room, and then it kind of just jumps suddenly, and then it goes to the rest of where it's showing leading up to the attic. And I felt, why was there that jump there? Like, why did it have to skip suddenly? I thought maybe it might have been a problem with the DVD, but no, it definitely wasn't.
They probably thought they had to add 2 minutes because it's like we're going to just be looking at just random walls.
Yeah, I had a problem with that. So the jump cuts, they happen every so often and frequently, and it just kind of distracted me throughout the entire movie. A couple other things that I wanted to point out with regards to the whole, I don't know if I fully believe that. When the killer makes his phone calls, he gets really loud and really obnoxious at times with it. And there's no way that the people wouldn't hear him in the house. Like, we all know, the viewers know that the killer's in the house all the time. We all know that. But the characters themselves, no, we do.
Yeah, I know. You find out early on.
Yeah, very early. But the characters don't. And so whenever you're hearing the obnoxious phone calls, like, there's some really high-pitched screaming there. And I'm just like...
It's only brought out once.
She would hear that.
Yeah. It's only mentioned once that somebody heard something in the house that wasn't on the phone, and that was when Peter comes in the house saying he was upstairs and said, what was all that screaming about?
Yeah, so like, I find that a little bit ridiculous that nobody else seems to hear, as if they are completely oblivious to everything else going on in the house. Just the police force in this, again, just I think honestly that this is part of some sort of extended universe with bad police forces in it, like completely inept and not knowing what to do or how to do their jobs. And John Saxon is, again, part of it. As much as I like John Saxon, I think he's pretty awesome, but he just seems to find himself in these same roles all the time in a horrible police force. And my theory is that he got fired from this police force because several years later he's in the police force for Nightmare on Elm Street. Yes. And I'm like, did you send him to Elm Street now to be as horribly, equally awful? So police forces aren't that bad in real life, and it just bothers me all the time.
No, you're right on that.
And like I said, I found it really boring at times. I was excited when things were happening, and I was enthralled when they were on the phone with the killer and he was making his obnoxious stuff. I did also really like how the phone tracing thing was shown. I thought that was okay. That's a unique little twist on it. But other than that, it was just slow and it dragged its feet. Yeah, it took its time, but I felt it could have been a little bit more occupied in certain areas.
I'm only going to disagree, but you know what? I know a lot of new generations that watch this will feel that way. Maybe it's because this was one of the first horror movies I saw. But to me, even watching it now, I still felt those scenes that seem boring were tension-filled, because you always know that the killer is right close. And so to me, the scenes where they're like waiting for the phone calls, waiting to tap the calls, for me it worked as tension-filled. Even knowing how the movie resolves, I still find it tension-filled. But I guess for a younger generation who expect to be rewarded every 5-10 minutes, this movie doesn't have that.
I guess, but...
And I'm not saying that's anything wrong with your generation. That's just the way movies were made back then.
And I get it.
That's how suspense was built.
You look at a movie like Alien, which definitely takes its time, but I felt like it was just so concerned with what was going on that I didn't have time to stop and think, wow, this is boring. Because I did find myself, honestly, looking at the clock every so often and be like, are we there yet?
You just wanted to leave.
That's not true at all. I was just like, when are we going to get to something that actually happens? I felt there was like unnecessary plot points in there. Like, I didn't care about Peter's piano playing. I didn't care about this 13-year-old girl that we'd never met before gone missing, that suddenly the entire town's going looking for her, which distracts from the house. I felt it was just randomly thrown in there, and it was a little bit obtuse for the movie.
I think this movie is... This is one of those movies that does not fall on the reliance of... What's that called when you give so much information at the beginning of a movie? I can't... It's fell off of my head. You know, when you get so much information that's just told to you and you're automatically, oh, we're being told that because it's...
Yeah, I get that.
This movie doesn't have any of that. We just are thrown into plot points that we don't even know if are important to the plot. And that's one thing I like it. This movie doesn't have to rely on everything is connected with everything. But I think this is one of those movies that if you sit and talk about it afterwards, things might be connected. The missing girl that goes missing, I think, may have been connected and may have been one of the first things that we find out about.
And you might be right, but that's my problem, is we don't know.
But this is what I'm saying. We are now in a society that we need everything answered for us, that I think this movie just has so many questions. Like, even the ending leaves you kind of with questions in your head rather than solid solutions.
To be honest, I felt the ending was good in its ambiguity. It ties into my whole inept police force. Because if you see the ending, you're going to completely agree with me. This police force has no idea what they're doing, without giving anything away. But I actually liked the ending.
Yeah.
I thought the ending was.
But
pretty
I think
well
this,
done.
I think this movie doesn't rely on, okay, you need to know this point. You need to know. They just throw us into these people's lives. Now that'll bring me to my negatives. One of my strong ones is, I won't go into it because you already did. Even as a kid, I always thought that some of the voices that are on the phone are so loud, I am shocked that you wouldn't be able to hear it. Now, if I give it any kind of, if I defend it in any way, those houses did have solid wood walls. So you close a door, yes, but there were times the voice, yes, it is.
No.
You never lived in those kind of houses.
Yeah, but I've been in them. I know what they're all about.
Yeah, well, you could get away with a lot of stuff. But some of the... So I'm not defending it, but if I had to, I'm saying it. But there are times that the screams happen where there are people that could have heard it. So I won't go into that anymore. My biggest problem is that maybe sometimes a little polishing is pretty good. Because we're thrown into these people's lives right away, like literally we know nothing about any of them except for what they tell us. And that leaves me kind of leaving with no real concern for the people. As in, I don't really care about these people except for the scenes I've seen. And I like to know a little bit, like I would have liked to know a little bit about more Olivia Hussey's character. I would have liked to know a little bit more about... But, again, it's small potatoes, but for me, it's nice when you're actually invested and worried about characters. And I was worried about when they were happening, but I would have been more worried if we got to know them a bit more instead of throwing them in their lives. But I still think it's a solid thing. One more positive before I leave, and I love that because you actually asked me about it. Near the end, when we see Olivia Hussey kind of confronting her fears and what she's dealing with, you actually start seeing it from her point of view, and you were getting confused about the breathing, and I go, actually, listen, that's Olivia Hussey's breathing now. That's not his. So her perspective is now being shown as the killer, like they're flipping it. Again, this movie does so many wonderful things, and I think that's why this movie is still a cult classic, because you can have 900 different theories about this movie, and I love that suddenly we concentrate on Olivia Hussey's breathing and how similar it is. And I think it makes it magical because it reminds us that our killer is anyone in the neighborhood. And I think it shows that the victim and the killer sound the same in different sequences. And I don't know, I could talk about this movie for hours, but unfortunately we're not going to.
But see, that was another big problem of mine, is because I literally had to stop and be like, wait a second, who, wouldn't he see her from where he is? And you're like, no, this is Olivia's, view, and I'm just, it's so distracting, and it's just, I get it, I understand why you say it, I understand.
Well,
I really do.
I think Bob Clark, this was one of his first films.
He was trying things out.
Right, and so he didn't have the template that John Carpenter got to see this and said, hey, I'm going to take that, and I'm going to make it better, because, this is not better than Halloween.
I get it, but still, he has to sit there and watch his own edit at some point, and you have to think, unless you're so in love with your own work of art here, that it's confusing for just the regular average viewer seeing it for the first time, because up until then, over an hour, we see nothing but from the killer's point of view, and then suddenly it switches with no explanation.
But I think that what happens is that Hollywood now, writes everything so like we have to know everything that I think a lot of horrors don't work now because we're told everything. And I think the quick edits and stuff, I think they make this movie in some ways. We'll
agree to
disagree.
Yeah, we'll agree to disagree on
so
that.
What are your numbers on Black Christmas? Oh, and while he's thinking of what he's going to give this, if you're looking for a lighthearted way to kick off Christmas,
no.
Remember, this is not it. This is a horror film and is not White Christmas. This is, you find something light and fluffy, but if you're looking for an alternative, this is a movie. Yes. So we hadn't really said that. I think you figured when we're talking about a horror, but I still feel there might be some people thinking, well, it's got Christmas. Maybe it's one of those Hallmark movies.
Don't show this to your kids.
No.
Don't show this to your kids. But
numbers.
As for numbers for me, I cannot give this anything more than a 1.5. No. I didn't hate it. It was okay at times, but it was really boring, and just the cuts and the confusion, as well as the long drawn-out subplots that didn't really do anything, I have to give it a 1.5.
Well, I am glad that I saw movies before they were so polished and stuff, so I can enjoy a movie that doesn't answer all my questions.
Here we go.
Can I have my moment here? So I'm glad that I still like a good suspense movie, because this one is it. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. I'm being very generous. Call me Santa Claus.
Yeah.
But I think this is a great film, and I love that John Carpenter took this and ran with it in a better way. But I still think Bob Clark gets a 4 out of 5 for this, because I think there were light and shadow moments that are better done than in the original Halloween. So I have to give him a little bit higher than a 3.5, so 4.
All right. Well, I'm dreaming of not a black Christmas. But thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be focusing a little bit more on the Christmas and holiday aspect of things over the next few weeks. So thank you for joining us this week to kick it all off. We look forward to having you with us over the next coming little while. Hope you liked it. If you did, make sure you comment, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You never know where we're going to end up next week, so thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
If this movie doesn't make your skin crawl, it's on too tight.